Hopefully other people will join. Let's see here. Let me share my screen.
It looks like we've got a good group of people already. That's a good sign.
Yeah, it is. Won't let me do that. Okay. We're gonna try this, see if I can play this video. But whoa, my camera just went blurry. What the heck? Don't lean back. All right, guys. Good evening to everybody. Hope everybody had a wonderful Christmas. And got lots of cool drone stuff or whatever you were wishing for. Um, so tonight with us is Dan, Alex, and Dave. Um, and just wanted to. It's been a slow news cycle, to be honest,
Well, it looks like
but
we made the
um,
news.
we sure did. And this is from SUAS News. And Gary Mortimer over there wrote an article. It's just a quick little snippet. Um, and so he says, well done to Josh Bixler of the FTCA and David Messina of the FPV Freedom Coalition and the legion of others from both organizations for getting their FAA community-based organization status. If you are not a Part 107 operator in the USA, you must fly by the rules of one of the 3 CBOs available. You don't have to be a member of them, but you do need to fly in accordance with one of them. It's a glimmer of hope that voices other than the AMA will be in the room.
One thing
And
I'd
he
like
gives links.
to point out really quick is when people say, if you're not a Part 107, if you are a Part 107 and you're flying
Mhm.
recreationally, you still need to follow the CBO guidelines as far as
Correct.
I understand it.
Yes,
Correct.
100%. And again, that comes to intent, right? So if you're a Part 107 operator, but you are flying recreationally and you're choosing to have the intent of flying recreationally, then you do need to fly under a set of safety guidelines.
Same
Um,
reason why 107 also needs trust if they're flying recreationally, and their
correct.
107 test doesn't account for anything.
Right. And so, the other flip side to this is that um, you can also choose which set of safety guidelines you want on a per flight basis. So if FPV FC's safety guidelines fits for one flight, FTCA's fits for another flight, or if you choose to go with the AMA and they fit for another flight, um, they're all options for you from a flight to flight basis. Just keep in mind that if challenged, you need to be able to state what set of safety guidelines you are operating under. He provides the link to the FPVFC, FTCA, and kind of shoots a little dig at the AMA here. The other one has held back the hobby so much that I'm not inclined to look for their guidance, is what he says. So, and he does mention that you will need to take the FAA trust test to comply with either the FPVFC or flight test. I think he mentions the Boy Scouts of America. I did not know that they offered the trust test.
Yes.
Um, so, either of them, we tend to lean towards Pilot Institute. Greg does a great job over there in his team of making things easy to understand, and definitely offers it for free and has a lot of different classes you can take. Some for free, some are paid.
And
But if you're looking to get your Part 107, it's a good place to go.
speaking of Greg, I don't know if you're going to show this later on the news, but
I am.
he has a video, yeah, related to this.
That's the video I want to show.
Mhm.
So, and then he offers, if you want to jump through or create your own CBO, here's the hoops, and they are extensive. It's a little bit more than just what he wrote, but you need to be 501c3 exempt from tax under the 501 A mission, which is demonstrably the furtherance of model aviation. Good grief. A comprehensive set of safety guidelines, provide programming support to local charter organizations, affiliates, and clubs, provide assistance and support in the development and operation of locally designated model aircraft flying sites. So good to be in the news. Good to be in the news in a good way. And thanks, Gary, over at US News. So, speaking of Pilot Institute, I'm hoping this comes through. Let's see what happens.
You might have to turn it up. It's usually
If you're
quiet
flying
on
a
our
drone
end.
of
Yeah.
any size for recreational purposes in the
that loud
United
enough?
That's
States,
good.
you have to select a community-based organization guideline or CBO guidelines. Let's take a look at 3 FAA-approved CBOs, their guidelines, and which one is best for you, and then when you need them. Let's get to it. First, you may be wondering what a CBO actually is, and that is a great question. A CBO is a nationwide non-for-profit organization that promotes recreational flying, and they also offer community events, seminars, guidance, any type of mentorship for those that are interested in getting into the hobby. They also offer guidelines on how to operate your drone safely. And as of the end of 2022, you must choose FAA guidelines that are approved by the FAA before you fly your drone recreationally, regardless of the size of your drone. The CBOs in this video are Flight Test Community Association, FPV Freedom Coalition, and the Academy of Model Aeronautics, also called AMA. Now, if you're not familiar, Flight Test Community Association is the arm of Flight Test, the popular YouTube channel that puts out very educational and very entertaining videos on flying foamy airplanes. Flight Test also spends tremendous time educating the younger generation using their STEM program nationwide. We will refer to them as FTCA for the rest of the video to make things a little bit easier. FPV Freedom Coalition is an avid voice for first-person view pilots across the country, and they work closely with legislators to protect the privilege of airspace access across the country. The Academy of Model Aeronautics, or AMA, has a variety of clubs across the country where members can fly mostly fixed-wing RC aircraft and share their passion with other like-minded individuals. Now, let's be clear here. You can select a CBO guideline before each flight, a different one if you want to. CBOs typically have specialties, whether it's fixed-wing RC, FPV flying, or flying very large drones, and pretty much everything in between. You might like FTCA for flying your fixed-wing RC aircraft, but the FPV Freedom Coalition guidelines might make a lot more sense when you're flying your quadcopter. And no, access to these guidelines does not require membership to a CBO. It is free, and this is very, very clear from the FAA. If you're flying under Part 107, this is not necessary at all. I want you to stop the video and move on to the next one. The
Unless you're
guidelines
flying
from
recreationally.
FTCA and Freedom Coalition were actually pretty easy to find on their website, on the homepage. The AMA, on the other hand, had us digging around about 6 pages before we could find the document, and even then it wasn't really clear at all that we had the right one. Every guidelines that we saw covers a variety of what I call common sense rules. You'll quickly know what I'm talking about once you start reading them. I'm not going to cover any of those, but let's talk about an important aspect of flying unmanned aircraft, which is flying near or over people or near objects or over objects. And if you want to follow along, you can download the cheat sheet that we put in the description. I think it's going to make your life a little bit easier. All 3 CBOs in this video prohibit flying over people, which actually makes sense because it's also not allowed under Part 107. Keep in mind that if you've heard about categories of drone like Category 1, 2, or 3, this is only a rule under Part 107, which means that if you're flying for recreational purposes, it is not going to apply to you. In addition to not flying over people, FTCA states that you should remain 25 feet away from other pilots and also 50 feet away from spectators. The FPV Freedom Coalition guidelines state that you should not disrupt or pose a danger to emergency response, which makes sense, large gatherings, and civil infrastructures. And if you're wondering what civil infrastructures actually are, they are your power, water, and transportation infrastructures that you can find across the nation. Think about your water treatment facility, your large power distribution sites, etc., etc. Note that the FPV Freedom Coalition guidelines do not mention any distance from other pilots and other spectators, which I think makes sense because under Part 107 there's also no such limitation, and they're more geared towards the quadcopter flying type of operation. The AMA had somewhat conflicting information about distance from people and objects. In one paragraph, it stated that you must stay 100 feet away from spectators during free flight, but in another, it mentions 25 feet away from individuals, 50 feet away from spectators, and 50 feet from power lines. Their guidelines also specify that you should not fly over occupied structure. This one had us scratching our head a little bit. Does this mean that you cannot fly over houses with people in them? your guess in this case is as good as ours. Let's talk about visual line of sight, or VLOS. All CBOs mention that visual observers are going to be optional unless the pilot is using FPV goggles. They also all mention that the visual observer, if one is being used, must be co-located next to the pilot. This means that your VO, visual observer, can be a mile away down the road from you using a radio to communicate. It can be confusing because this method is actually allowed under Part 107, and it can be a little bit confusing, maybe not a mile away, but it can be not co-located, let's put it this way. FTCA matches the requirements from Part 107 when it comes to visual line of sight, which requires that both the operator and the visual observer, if one is used, must be able to see the drone at all times, but that only one of them must see the drone at all times. Now, it can get confusing here. Replay what I just said. The visual observer and the pilot must be able to see, but only one of them must see the aircraft at all times. So for example, if you have your goggles on and you're the pilot, at all time, you should be able to see the drone if you were to remove the goggles. And your visual observer should always look at the drone, should always see the drone when you're under the goggles. Now, the FPV Freedom Coalition guidelines on visual line of sights were pretty close, with the only exception that either the VO or the pilot must be able to see the drone at all time. This means that, in theory, the drone could disappear from the pilot's view as long as it is in the VO's view. But keep in mind that your VO must be co-located, so it's almost the same end result at the end. There's a very, very minute difference here. You just can't daisy chain VOs to fly 10 miles away from the pilot. On the FPV Freedom Coalition guidelines, they are applicable to FPV and also non-FPV operation. For specific FPV operation, the Flight Test Community Association, the FTCA, requires that you are familiar with FPV operations before you go fly FPV, which makes sense, and that you announce powering the aircraft, which is also a good habit even if it's not in the guidelines. They also prohibited FPV operation for drones over 55 pounds. So if you're looking to do this, those are not going to be the guidelines for you. Now, we were pretty disappointed to find that not only did the AMA have guidelines for flying FPV indoors, where it's not controlled by the FAA and the FAA has no authority, they also required membership in order to fly FPV under their guidelines. The FAA is pretty clear that membership is not required to follow approved guidelines, so we're not quite sure how they were able to get away with that one. The last topic I want to talk about is night operations. Both the FTCA and the AMA required an anti-collision light visible from 3 statute miles. This is the same as Part 107. FTCA specified that in an area that is well lit, you can forego the use of anti-collision light, which makes sense. If the drone is highly visible, you don't need to have those on. They also recommend flying at night using a guide or a mentor if you are a novice. The AMA went one step further in requiring that you also have a light that shows attitude and the direction of flight. They also required night training through the AMA, which we're guessing is actually not free. So that's another ding right here. We were surprised to see that no specific night operation information was in the FPV Freedom Coalition guidelines. Keep in mind, if you own a small drone under 250 grams, putting a light on top of it for night flying might take you over the 250 gram limit, which requires registration. Now, registration is only $5. It's good for 3 years. It's also available on the FAA Drone Zone website. This is something that you need to plan for before your next night flight. The DJI Mini 2, for example, with using a Firehouse light, most of the Firehouse lights, it is still under 250 grams or 0.55 pounds. But using a Mini 3 Pro, for example, putting any lights on top of that one would put it over the limit. So know your drone, know your limits in this case. There were also a few interesting nuggets. The FPV Freedom Coalition, for example, had a great definition of ground level, which clarified that flying from the top of a 200-foot building, for example, is going to put you 200 foot above the ground already. I'm glad actually to see that definition in there, because it was one of the things that I asked the FAA to clarify in the new advisory circular, and I'm glad that the FAA did, and I'm glad that the FPV Freedom Coalition put that in there as well. Another nugget, not such a good one, is that the AMA limits 4S batteries for drone racing. The current standard for drone racing is 6S batteries, so it sounds like a lot of FPV racers, including multi-GP, might want to find new guidelines in order to remain within the actual rules of the FAA. If you plan to fly a drone over 55 pounds, that's another nugget, and you want to do that recreationally using the AMA guidelines, you will need to fly at a AMA fixed site, which more than likely requires membership in order to follow those rules. It's usually in their bylaws, it's usually in the letter of agreement that they receive from the tower. And also flying a turbine-powered RC aircraft is also going to require some kind of fee. There's a $15 application fee on the AMA website for that last one. From here, go ahead, download the guidelines, read all the details, print a copy of it, follow the guidelines during each flight, leave a comment in the section if you have any question, and then make sure you fly safely. We'll see you on the next video.
Josh, are you not subscribed to Pilot Institute?
I must not be.
The evidence is right there.
Boom, done. I watch their videos all the time. I do that a lot with YouTube. I don't subscribe to a ton, but I seek them out. So, you know, I'm a little weird like that. But
there was one
yeah.
there was one correction I'd call out, and I'm grateful for Greg. Great video, but he described us as working closely with legislators. Of course, we work closely with the FAA, not legislators. If we were to work closely with legislators, we would be a lobbying organization, which is a 501c6, which certainly when we found out that to be a CBO back in late 2018, when we read this, it was curious that the FAA was looking for organizations that by definition could not be lobby organizations. Right. So that's fine, but we're not a lobby organization. We do not spend a lot of time with legislators, specifically federal, congressional representatives and senators. A 501c3 is allowed to spend a little bit of time, and it's normally a percentage of revenue gathered. So we're not lobbyists. We don't spend a lot of time there because it would be in violation of our agreement to be a 501c3.
Right. And
other than that, great video.
A lot of the stuff that we seek out for legislator contact is we reach out to the community to make that contact. I mean, obviously as an individual or as a organization, we can make that limited contact, but we seek out the community to make that contact. And, you know, that comes, it becomes much more impactful for individuals to do that, especially since generally you can only reach out to your local Congress people. And so I'm reaching out to Arizona. Alex is reaching out to Pennsylvania?
Maryland.
Pennsylvania.
Well, I'm in both states equal amount of time.
I know,
so I get it.
So and so on and so forth, so that you know, we're spreading it out and getting that contact out. So but yeah, definitely not a lobby.
I love Greg's video. There was a few points in there where he just sort of quickly makes some underhand or some comments about the AMA where you can tell Greg's not real thrilled with it. Just things like, oh, you know, I went to FPVFC's website. Oh, there's like safety guidelines. Oh, the FTCA's guidelines. Great, right there. AMA, where are your guidelines again? Oh, yeah, they're buried way underneath your website. And this requires you to take a test that you have to pay for from the AMA before you can do this.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of that going around. And I mean, just in the two articles tonight, whether it's, you know, the video or SUAS News, there's digs coming out. So it's definitely interesting. And I just wanted to highlight some of the key differences between us. And the differences honestly are minor, but sometimes they can be significant. So we were able to skate free of having to dictate anything on night operations. And, you know, recreational, the exception for recreational operators doesn't have a limit on night operations. So why should we? And so that's definitely important.
That's important because we left it out. That means you can fly at night. Yeah. Yep.
Yep. You just have to follow the same rules you would during the day. You have to be able to see your drone. So at night, if you can't see it, you might want some sort of light on it so you can see it some distance.
Yeah. Use your best judgment, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, it all comes down to you as the operator, and what rules you're flying by, and your best judgment on how you can accomplish, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So, it's definitely, pick your poison, right? So, we're Dan and Dave and Blunty and Alex, everybody worked really hard on getting those rules done for us and getting them submitted through, I don't know how many cycles, 5 cycles through the FAA.
Ours or FTCA?
Ours was 3.
Ours.
2, okay. And then FTCA was 5, right?
8. I thought there were 8.
Oh, jeez.
I'm not sure that they told us how many times they went,
Not-
but it was quite a few.
Yeah, not ours. Yeah, not ours to say.
Oh wait. Oh, never mind. Sorry, I was thinking of a different number.
At any rate, it's definitely it was a process, and so great work to everybody.
And Greg has a link in that YouTube video to a
Yes.
good comparison. I don't know if you were planning on bringing that up.
Yep, I was. So let me get this opened up here. So,
and I'm pretty sure he spent quite a few hours going over everybody's guidelines and making comparisons and making that video.
I think he did. So you can see some of the major differences here. Looks like you linked it already, but obviously there's definitely differences in terms of flying over people. Well, no differences in flying over people, but near people and objects.
Yeah, you can't fly over. Isn't no flying over people in the advisory circular? Or in
the operations over people, I think requires a waiver.
Well, that's the Part 107
it doesn't require a waiver.
rules.
Yeah. So, Dave, you're nodding your head. Which one is it?
It's in there, but it's in both. The OOP is a 107 provision, and I don't think there is any restriction to fly over people in the AC 9157C, but I could be wrong on that one.
Yeah, but, in recreational, you can't fly over people. That's explicit. So, but I think if I remember correctly, they updated the 107 test for operations over people, and
maybe I'm thinking that it was one of those strong recommendations that they wanted all the CBOs to have that in their guidelines.
Yeah, but I think for commercial purposes, especially for the sake of like news gathering, sometimes that's necessary. So, anyway, differences in visual observers slightly, not major. Although FPV Ops requires an AMA membership, let's continue to stick it to FPV.
Have any of you looked at where does it say that in the AMA guidelines that to fly FPV you need to be a member?
I don't frequent the AMA website, so.
But I'm sure if Greg saw it, it's got to be in there. If he said it in his video.
Yeah, that's a little weird.
Yeah, I read it. I read the 10 documents, and there were references to members, and it wasn't clear to me. I am an AMA member, have been for decades, and so I was signed in inside their paywall. So it was like okay, so it just was not clear to me whether you needed to be a member, and they kept referring to the individuals adhering to the safety guidelines as members, and so there is more than an implication. I agree with Greg's findings.
Yeah, I mean, I was an an AMA member for all of a year, and that was just so I could fly with a local group of old guys that got a kick out of FPV and my FPV wing and stuff like that. And we joined them because one of the guys that flew with them was one of the lead testers on like graphene batteries when they first came out, and I mean the dude had just a wealth of knowledge on batteries and soldering batteries and doing all this crazy stuff with batteries and stuff.
Overcharging
So
them.
listen, Alex. But just a wealth of knowledge on batteries. And when I was first starting in the hobby, he was a godsend on that kind of information. So, but at any rate,
So
yeah. And then
Brian
I
had a
let it.
question in the chat about has the FAA ever defined what is over people?
To be honest, I
Not
don't know that they.
Directly over.
not explicitly. They do characterize an assembly of people, and they have explicitly chosen not to describe a number that constitutes an assembly. And so this is written up in excruciating detail in operations over people document with category 1, 2, and 3, I think, and 4.
Yeah, I've heard the FAA, some people from the FAA describe it, saying it, well, it's vague on purpose, and it's fine to cross over people, like to fly, and momentarily go across somebody's
like perpendicular, yeah,
path or where they are.
Transiting, right?
Yeah, transit across, but you can't hover above them. But does that mean like is above them like directly and you're like 1 inch off to the side? But it's going to be like, well, if you get called into court, you have to defend whether you were above them or not, and I guess it's up to the court to decide.
Yeah, and that's going to be the same for any type of violation, right? You've got to defend what you were doing. And so, again, it comes back to use your best judgment when it comes to flying over people, right? So, if it's transitory and you're moving from point A to point B, then, you can do that. But, just again, use your best judgment.
We fly FPV drones, so we're not hovering over anyone, right? We are always moving forward. Almost always.
It depends, right? Sometimes you can hover, but I mean, it's just think about if a malfunction were to happen and what would be the end result of that based on what you were doing. So, I mean, I've had an aircraft malfunction, 10 feet in front of me when I should have had a solid connection and failsafe. So, it just depends on, crap happens sometimes. So, let's see. I wonder if the FAA views altitude in that as well. I think we've all just had a drone fall. Yeah. So I would say FAA views on altitude would probably be very specific.
Well, the higher you are, the harder it is to tell if you're right over somebody. That's what I think he's trying to get at there.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So, yeah. I don't honestly. I normally wouldn't have played a 10-minute video, but the news cycle is extremely slow right now for anything besides Ukraine and Iran and all the crap that's going on in the world right now. But I thought this was kind of cool. In case you ever wanted to see what homes frozen over looks like. There you go.
They look like models. They don't look real.
It's like somebody poured some icing over a gingerbread house.
Yeah.
Right?
Where is this? There's no cars.
It's
wait,
up in
never mind.
Oh, there's
a tractor.
There's a tractor.
So the drone is flying over a lake or the ocean. I'm not sure which this
ocean,
video was. Looking at the houses that are looking out at the ocean then. Yeah, and so strong winds and cold temperatures made huge waves that just froze the entire fronts of those houses.
That's so insane. Like, oh God. But yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Let's see. This is in Ontario in Canada. So but obviously a lot of northern states, Buffalo had some heavy hit. So.
Yeah, we lost, I think, 31 people in those storms. So
yeah,
very tragic. And I'm sure Dan could tell stories about what you should carry in your car and in terms of an emergency situation. This is something we took seriously in Texas with water and enough gas in the car when you were out in the sticks in Texas. It's very serious and a very sad situation in Buffalo where most of the fatalities were people stranded in their cars.
Yeah, I guess I just assume everybody was taught the same thing I was when I was learning to drive. What kind of emergency kit you should have in your car, and this was back before cell phones. So yeah, you had to
Mm-hmm.
be self-sufficient and expect to get
Right.
stuck in the snow with no help for a day.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's in here in upstate New York. It's not. I mean, no one thinks about it. We don't talk about. There's no education, for kids in this, and it couldn't hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Red J says onboard cameras are getting better in low light. Will we be adding night operation allowances to CBO guidelines? You are allowed to fly under our guidelines with night flying. The reason that there is no night flying specific stuff in our safety guidelines is because there is no night flying specific restrictions in the FAA
Right. There are no
regulations.
restrictions. Right. Right.
So,
typical of the FAA, lack of wording means it's okay.
Right. So we are permissive. I mean, our safety guidelines are permissive on night flying, just as the FAA regulations are. The only restrictions on night flying from the FAA come from Part 107, and that's the point where you need to have the light for 3 statute miles, yada yada yada. So,
and this is the point. This is the point where we were on with the FAA about you're making rules. You're overstepping, and you're using the advisory circular process to set rules. And so now we have 2 of the 3 CBOs have complied with that direction from the FAA, and so we'll see where this goes over time.
Yeah,
Meaning, we'll see if we're pushed to add restrictions to our safety guidelines.
The other rule you might run into is if you try to get LANC authorization for flying at dawn, dusk, or at night, you'll get rejected as a recreational operator.
So if you're operating in controlled airspace.
Yeah. Meat was asking, what does a 3 statute mile light look like? I assume like the lights that Greg was showing in his video that he was putting on top of the DJI drones.
That's correct. They're I think they're 34 grams or something like that. Firehouse, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one that Vic Moss uses, and he's very supportive of it.
Yeah,
but yeah, if you're doing an FPV flight and your visual observer has to watch your drone at night, just a couple little LEDs are all you need to be able to see it pretty far.
Right.
Yeah, and there's even one that's a little circular one that shines all around it too. So it's just
right. And note is the 3 statute mile light should be placed on the top of the drone because it's an anti-collision. It's intended for crewed or manned aircraft to see your drone. So, if you want to be seeing it from the ground, then put some LEDs on the bottom of the drone.
Yeah.
What do you use that for, Alex?
If I fly my DJI stuff at night, I haven't put on a racing quad because I'm not sure how I'm going to attach it yet. It usually uses Velcro, but I don't trust that with the way I fly.
Or the way you crash.
Yeah. How many G's can that Velcro handle?
I don't know, but I know my racing quads average about 5 to 6 when I fly.
Yeah. So KBS Ken is right. There's ones that are smaller. They're just like little. Looking for something on my desk that's about that size, maybe that big, that sits on the top of your drone and can do that. But let's see. Don't look at them when
surprised that
on.
didn't blind the camera.
And a lot of them strobe, right, Alex?
Yes, this one is currently it was strobing.
So apparently you need
there we go. No, every time I don't know what rate it's there. I think it's just doing 2 flashes at a time and then breaking for a while. I don't know.
Okay.
I can't figure out this power button. It's a low quality power button because it gets stuck all the time.
All right. So Red J says what baffles me is why drones that are 1K plus just don't come stock with a 3 statute mile light by now. Yeah, that's a good point. You would think that it just should.
A lot of people don't fly at night and don't need it, but
I mean, an option would be nice, right? So, All right, so last thing I have, and I've seen articles on these guys before flying at Grimm's Brothers. So this is in Loveland, Colorado. But they're doing both tiny whoop races as well as street league style racing in a brewery called Grimm's Brothers. And I've seen this before. Maybe it was Jesse Perkins that posted uh, something like this a while ago, but this is an ongoing thing. Um, so if you're in the Colorado area and it's the fourth Tuesday, is it fourth Tuesday? Let's see, hold on. Yep, every fourth Tuesday from now until April, they're going to be doing flying through there, and they're flying through the beer halls and right now around Christmas trees and all that kind of stuff. Street League Racing also did an event at Edgewater in Flight Test Headquarters. Maybe about 2 months ago, I think. And they did a video on that. So Street League's starting to make the rounds, and good on them. They're doing good stuff. So, but yeah, that's literally all I have for articles because it is just dry as a bone out there for news. So,
Well, related to the CBO stuff, Joshua Bardwell also did a video with
yes,
Dave and Josh Bixler from FTCA. So if people haven't watched that, they should definitely check that video out too. And I don't know, Dave, was there some common comments on Joshua Bardwell's video that we should cover in our meeting?
Yeah, there were a good set. So it's gotten 12,000 views in one day being up. So it's a good rate. And when any topic approaching remote ID comes up, the normal set of comments are very negative and not pleasant to read, derogatory toward us, toward the video, toward the FAA, toward pretty much everything. Interestingly, there was a trend of positivity in the comments, and happily, a lot of people who were watching knew Josh Bixler and were very complimentary to Flight Test Community Association, and Josh for what he's done, which I think is great. He has done a lot. And let's see, there were questions, and one of the questions that was left open, and in fact, during the filming, Josh asked me the question and then said, and I said, I don't know. And so he was thrilled that he had stumped me. We had a good laugh over that. But when it was released, and he's now since clipped that question, we left that question out. So I answered that. That came up 3 or 4 times in the question. Let me see if I can get the question right. You have if you're flying in a FRIA, you have a home-built UAS without remote ID. Can I fly under Part 107? And we believe the answer is yes. So this is important for people testing drones, and they receive them and they don't have remote ID, or it's an aircraft intended for indoors and you take it outside. It has no remote ID device on it.
So the way I wrap my head around that is there's 2 sets of rules. There's rules for manufacturing a drone and rules for flying a drone. So if you're building a drone, you have to follow the manufacturing rules, and you have to create standard remote ID and all that stuff if you're building a drone in the United States, unless you're building it for your own home-built purposes, for recreational purposes. But let's say you didn't build this drone, you just have it, and now you want to go fly it as Part 107. Well, you're not the manufacturer of it. You can take it to a FRIA and fly it under the operator rules, which say you can fly in a FRIA with no remote ID. That's how we're interpreting how that works.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to look at it.
It's like the intent of the build was not for Part 107, but once it's built, you could use it that way.
Yeah,
I just
exactly.
found this laying on the ground, and now I'm gonna go fly it.
And
Broke
here's the
my
Yeah.
other
thing, I
5
don't
quads,
think
but this one still works.
right. And so, I mean, I think the thing that ultimately we need to understand is that it's not a problem until it's a problem, right? So, whatever the case may be, if you're out there doing what you need to do, and you're doing it safely, I don't think the FAA is going to give, a crap, you know, to be honest with you, that you're in a FRIA, you're flying Part 107 without remote ID. I mean, you're in what would be considered a safe zone, right? So if that's the case, you don't injure anybody and you're staying below the 400 foot if it's in Class G, and you're applying for Lance if you have to, and you're going through all these steps, I don't think they're going to care. Now, it becomes a problem if somebody gets injured or you're, shooting up to 10,000 feet for whatever reason, then it becomes a problem, and, it's going to be, looked at a different way, I imagine. So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of times the policing on this is going to be case by case basis at this. Now, if you're out there flying a drone without remote ID and you're not in a FRIA and you're doing stuff, I think that's going to be a problem. But that remains to be seen on, what the enforcement on that's going to look like.
And
So,
just a reminder that the operator rules come into effect in the middle of September 2023.
mhm.
Right. Good point. Good
And
point, Dan.
that sort of segues into FRIAs, the FAA recognized
Identification area.
Identification area.
I don't know why I don't have that memorized yet, but that's why those are important once that comes into effect, and you want to fly a drone without remote ID on it. And
Yes.
Right.
today, there are no recognized, well, there are no FRIAs from the FAA yet, but we have started the process of requesting some of them, right, Alex?
I've
You have
applied for
4.
4 so
I have
far
1.
and working a few others.
Yeah, no, so this is curious. I got the answer back from the FAA. So we brought the point up that I think 2 weeks ago that we observed that you did not have to be signed in under the so far single ID that we have for FPVFC to submit an application. Interestingly, when I look for all of the free applications that have been posted, I find one, mine, and not Alex's and not Dan's. So I then looked again at and this is, we will take a look at this, but we think there's some confusion here. There's certainly, we need a little better communication with the FAA to figure out what is it they want the CBOs to do. This has not been, we know it's not clear to us, and I don't think it's clear to the other CBOs. But the FAA came back and said, oh, no, it has to go through a CBO. Any application of a FRIA, what you saw, Mr. Messina, on the CBO dashboard was a request for a fixed site, which of course is, may I fly in controlled airspace? Has nothing to do with a FRIA.
Yeah, maybe
Or it's
Alex
separate.
or I
And so,
should send you a screenshot of what we see,
Yes.
because it's probably different
Here,
than
I'll
what
pull
you
that up
see.
really quick.
yeah, please do.
Yeah, and while he's pulling that up, we'll reply to Shawnee D that currently, as we understand it, if you are a Part 107 pilot and you want to build a drone, let's say you want to build a Cinelifter for a movie set, you would be a manufacturer of that drone. You would have to comply with all the manufacturing rules. You would have to have a standard remote ID, which means you have to broadcast the live location of the operator at all times and meet
As well as
all
the
those
drone.
other requirements, and has to be broadcasting.
Has to have a pre-flight safety test that if it fails the RID system, it prevents the aircraft from taking off.
Pretty much
Yeah.
currently impossible for any hobbyist to build one of those on their own.
So that is in direct conflict with what we were told on January 21st, 2021 by the executive director of the FAA, of the UAS Integration Office, who's now retired as of last week. And that was contradicted in September by several FAA staff. And that was confirmed with one of our colleagues who flies for the film industry in California, and he contacted his FISDO, who contacted the FAA headquarters remote ID office, and they confirmed that that answer, just as Dan was characterizing it. So we're not happy with that answer. And that means that, so we have to come up with a way to allow a small manufacturer to create standard remote ID. That's an issue. It also means that if you're Horizon Hobby or Rotor Riot or Race Day Quads or Get FPV, and you're selling BNFs, bind and fly or ready to fly, that has to be a standard remote ID. If you intend it to fly outside. If you intend it to fly inside, then the FAA is not there's no jurisdiction, no authorization.
Who knows if someone's going to try this or not, but you could try to build a drone, say, this was for indoor use only. Hey, look, I found this drone. It's already built. Now it's been manufactured. I'm going to go fly it outside as part of 107. Could you use that loophole?
We anticipate that will happen.
Yeah. And I also think that, again, it comes back to, it could come back to a question around intent. This is a big thing with the FAA, is this intent, right? I built this model intending to use it for recreational, but I got a job, 2 weeks ago to fly it commercially. So it has remote ID on it via a module, but I'm still complying with the rules, but it just happens to be a home built. So it's this weird gray area that we had clarification on it. They rescinded the clarification on it, and now they're saying something different. And so I mean, the goal of the FAA is to get everything on standard remote ID. Well, unfortunately, there's an entire hobbyist community that outclasses commercial and everything else. So it's just they don't understand who their users are. So and again, I don't know that they care a whole lot. They're out there to make regulations and comply. So
to Meet's question there, I assume, Dave, that was not in writing. That was in a meeting you had with Jay, right?
Yeah,
that's correct. It's verbal.
Yeah.
Yes, I did bring more than one person with me.
The FAA likes to do things verbally so that they're not officially recorded anywhere.
And here's the thing, the entire U.S. government likes to do things verbally.
Yeah.
They will avoid writing emails. They will avoid doing all this stuff because all that stuff is subject to FOIA requests. So the more that they can do verbally as opposed to putting in writing outside of official channels, they're going to do that. So, yeah, good times.
Right.
So, Alex, did you find...
Yeah, I have it pulled up if you guys want me to share screen.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, just 1 second. Taking a few screenshots that I've been posting in our main.
While you're bringing that up, Alex, there was an interesting thought for freeze for FPV racing. And so, as we've been discussing for a long time, we have requested that the FAA create a rapid stand-up of a FRIA to support FPV racing. They, in 89 AC Circular 89-3 on FRIAs, they did come up with an event which they promised to respond to in 90 days. So we think 2 weeks is probably good. 90 days not good enough. So the recommendation that came up was one individual said, well, as part of the discussions with the FAA, why don't you suggest that you bring along one broadcast module and turn it on for the race? And I was like, ooh. So Alex, I would, if you have thoughts about that now, or if you think about it, over the next couple of days, I thought that was creative as a mitigation.
The only issue is you're not gonna have altitude, vector information, speed, all that kind of stuff.
FAA will go
Which
back
is
with
not
yeah.
no, but which is not an issue because the tolerance of the accuracy tolerance for both lateral and vertical is within the flight envelope of the race, the entire flight envelope. So if you think of the like a parallel pipette of where am I flying, right? It's 150 by maybe 100 feet by 50 feet, and tell me where I'm wrong, Alex. Maybe a little bit. Maybe it's 200 by
Depends.
150.
Well, just
Yeah, but
multiple
let's just say it's 200 by 200 by 50. That's pretty close to the accuracy requirements. And if you put the module in the middle, it covers it.
It's not a bad thought.
So
not a bad thought
so
at
it's
all.
I thought that's pretty clever.
Yeah.
And it certainly satisfies the intent. And it satisfies an FPV racer's desire of, I really don't want to add any weight to this. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So pretty clever. And Alex, as I said, if thoughts on that idea come to mind,
event broadcast station. So like basically create an event broadcast station. That's a method of complying with the rule where anywhere within the covered broadcast station of that module is covered temporarily for all aircraft, and all incidents or notifications go through the point of contact X for that station.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You just have to
And my thought,
hover
Which
in
would be the
Nevada.
event manager.
well, if the event manager is going to know who the racers are, and so the FAA could come back and say, well, you don't know who's flying. It's like, oh yes, we
Yeah, I do. We have registration.
Right. So this is,
You have
to
more
me, it was
registration
a
than you.
very, to me, this was a very creative recommendation. So that came out of
Okay.
that was
Yeah,
in
that
the
would be-
comments.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I think it'd be useful.
so
So did I stall long enough for your for you to get those screenshots up?
Yep.
I've had this stuff for much at the start of that.
Excellent.
So
Well,
Well,
So if
obviously
I
I
launch
can't see it.
the FRIA dashboard, right? Are you guys?
Yep, I
So
can
this
see
is
it.
basically what happens when you see the FRIA dashboard. You can see I've submitted 4. I have a draft of 1. I can manage them. If I go for this one here, this is a local flying field, but that just shows part of that. Let me
Yeah, if you go back, you can just
actually
like start a new one.
create
Yeah.
one. So on this page is where it's asking us, or asking the person applying, if they're CBO or educational institution. Since we're a CBO, can select that. Select a community-based organization. We can choose any of the 3. So the FAA has no limitation currently, but
Yeah,
so
so weird. Anybody can
that's
fill
what
this
we're trying
out.
to.
Anybody can select that, and it doesn't, like, the CBO doesn't get notified. We don't know anything
Exactly.
about this. Like, everybody in the world could submit one of these under the AMA or the FPV Freedom Coalition, and we don't
Flight
know what would
test.
happen next.
Exactly. And the basically part where the FAA claims to be safe for themselves is with the declaration where you say you have the authority to act on behalf of the CBO, and so
unless they're reaching out to the CBOs on every single one of these requests, then
They aren't yet.
we
I
can
haven't
be
heard
like,
it.
well,
I haven't
no.
heard anything.
I know, right?
Unless they will in the
So-
future. I don't know.
Exactly.
Maybe they haven't staffed that department yet.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to work on, saying if we can be like, hey, all FPVFC members, you're authorized, but we don't know if we can do that yet. So we're trying to
remember,
work out that kind of stuff.
their nominal response time is 90 days.
And I'm
that doesn't
expecting
mean-
at least
that
5
doesn't-
months.
That doesn't mean you'll get an approval in 90 days. That just means you'll get a response in 90 days.
Yeah, I was
Well,
totally
I'm
expecting
5 months.
that, Dave, you created our CBO application, you'd be in there in the CBO dashboard, and you would be able to request FRIAs, and nobody else could. But that's
Yeah.
not how it looks like
Not the
right
case,
now.
apparently.
Yeah, that is what I expected as well.
Joshua
So there's
Bardwell
at least-
FRIA.
Yeah. So there's at least 169 FRIA applications submitted. So
I
And I
imagine
think
a
I
good
did
chunk
one
of those
after
are going to
that.
be
I have a
AMA,
feeling
right?
it's going to
So,
be at least 5 months. What? Most of those are the AMA more than likely.
yeah. So, and
I would
can you
assume
go in
there's
and
only
view them
5 or
or view
6
locations or
FPVFC.
anything?
What do you?
We can't see anybody
The
else's.
ones that have been applied
Okay.
for. Yeah, we can't see any others. Only the ones that we've
Right.
done.
Right.
Gotcha.
And I can only see mine, which is, that's, so more work to be done to figure this out.
Yeah, good suggestion, Meat. We should try to hack the URL and see if we can get into somebody else's. Hopefully they're smarter than that, but you never know.
Yeah, let's not burn
It's
some
the
bridges
government. I
either.
don't think.
FBI
Could
shows
share it
up.
to one of us, and we'll find out right now.
All right.
Well, any of you could go log in and
Yeah.
do the same thing,
Yeah.
assuming you've gone to the drone zone before and you've created an account there.
Obviously registered, all that fun stuff. Yeah. All right. So I just wanted to answer a couple of these questions. So Shawnee D says, what about indoor and outdoor flights on the same flight? That's over 90% of my Part 107 flights. So while you're outside, you're subject to the FAA's regulations. While you're inside, you are not.
You're not.
Yeah. So it can be a half and half flight, right? So just make sure while you're outside the building, you are adhering to FAA regulations, CBO guidelines if you're flying recreationally, Part 107 if you're flying commercially, which it seems like a lot of your flights are because you are a responsible pilot.
But it gets more complicated because you shouldn't be able to purchase a drone that's not standard remote ID, so you can't turn it off when you're inside. But he's flying, I think he mentioned earlier, really small, like 20 grams and less drones under Part 107, and you can't add a remote ID module to that or it's not going to fly. So, like, he's in a really tough spot there. The FAA has basically said, you're out of a job, sorry.
Yeah, so, and that's the difference too between an RID module and standard remote ID, right? So a remote ID module will not restrict your capability of taking off because it's a separate part, whereas standard remote ID could. So,
Oh,
I
and
mean,
he's saying that he can't take off with remote ID indoors.
Right.
Technically, according to the specifications, you can pass the remote ID pre-flight check test with no satellites, no GPS lock, and then you can fly. That's a weird loophole in the rules.
Yeah.
Right, and that's in the mock, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not in the final rule, but in the means of compliance that
they approved.
Did I help write? Minor role.
So, let's see. Could a notify and fly or land side authorization for a specific location and temporary flight path? That's something we've pushed for a long time for rapid race setup. So if you're having a weekend race with your buddies, being able to set up a FRIA and not have to run remote ID, something that the FAA hasn't deemed necessary yet. So we will continue to push that. We've pushed it for a long time. We will continue to do that.
Yeah, I think when we get closer to the unmanned traffic management system, the lack of a network remote ID, all of a sudden, notify and fly will become much more interesting to the FAA and to NASA.
All right, so Brian asked, does FPVFC have plans to create a dashboard for requests for us to manage FRIA requests?
Good question.
Yeah, it's something we need to talk about internally. So we've talked about it a little bit, but we haven't finalized anything or
and we thought we might get something from the FAA on this, but we'll see.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it's going to depend on the FAA laying down restrictions on other, people who are not the entity or the CBO, essentially, being able to access and request FRIAs, because that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So once that lockdown probably happens, then yes, we will have to manage that ourselves. So let's see. I'm just trying to answer some of these questions here. Appreciate the questions. We love the feedback.
And then, of course, in managing data like that is we have considerations for personal identification information, PII, as well as concerns about accepting any information from any individuals under 13 years old. So
Yes.
we're pretty aware of laws about things like that.
Let's see. What is our proposed method of rule updates, and how often do we expect to make changes in the next 1 to 2 years and then beyond? So, that is
Good
another
question.
that is another point of contention that we've had with the FAA. There is no current process for updating rules. So if we needed to make a rule change, we don't know if we would have to resubmit and get reapproved as a CBO, or if we could just just add something to the to our rule set and sidestep the FAA. But then, do we run afoul of them and they take our status away? There's no they're
A good
in the
example. A
infant
good example to
stages of
watch
it.
would be, for example, if we had something restricting racers to 4S batteries and we wanted to change it to 6S, how long would that take? Would that take the organization and then the FAA to process that change? So that's something that
Very good example.
might be interesting. A good yes.
I know. I couldn't have thought of anyone better.
Yeah, I keep saying I think the FAA thought they would make these regulations and set them in stone and they're done and never think about it again.
Oh, besides, they said they're done with recreational.
Oh yeah,
rules
they were done with that beforehand. Yeah.
Right. That's So what who Alex is quoting is Jay Merkel at the beginning of the Beyond Visual Line of Sight at Aviation Rulemaking Committee. Pretty close paraphrase. We're done with all recreational regulations, so now we're moving on to commercial, and that's what we're going to exclusively focus on in this BVLOS arc. So we have
AKA recreational doesn't make them any money, so
well, yeah. We've had a lot of discussions about that very point.
And some of the
with the new deputy director of the integration office, Abby Smith, and there is a new division or executive director, the UAS integration office. Jeffrey Vincent is the new individual. Jeffrey replaces Jay Merkel. That happened last week. Abby is not getting the role, which I was bummed out because Abby is Abby is so Abby continues as the deputy administrator of the UAS integration office, and Jeffrey steps in as the executive director, I believe is his title.
So we'll need to figure this gentleman out. And
yes, he comes from. He has. So I recognize this type of move. Anyone who comes from a large corporation or maybe the government can recognize this. Jeffrey has no experience in UAS.
Cool.
He has no experience in advanced air mobility. He comes with
very malleable.
Comes with extensive experience from ATM, air traffic management. So highly regarded, fantastic resume. I'm sure a very bright individual. Is made vice president in the FAA, and that's significant. I'm not being sarcastic at all. So we'll see what we have in front of us.
Alex, I need you to take your Emacs drones over to his office, please.
We gave those away, remember?
Oh, you're killing me, Small.
I asked Vic to hold on to them. He said I couldn't play with them anymore.
I'm sure we could talk Emacs into sending another one if that was the purpose.
Sure or somebody else for that matter. Yeah. You could probably get a new just get you a gremlin from flight testing.
Oh, I wanted
that'd be nice to have.
Wanted to point out one other thing. Like, if you really look into all these rules closer, you'll find lots of things that just don't make sense, or things that are impossible to enforce. For example, like the whole manufacturing date of September or December, whichever way you want to look at it.
December. Yeah.
When is a home-built drone manufactured? When is a repair a replacement? So I built this drone last January. I replaced a motor. I replaced an arm. Oh, I'm replacing the flight controller. Now it's time to replace the rest of the motors, the props. Is it still the same drone? Dan, is it not the same drone?
Why does But for a home built, it doesn't matter, right? It's not subject to
Well,
subpart F or
let's say
part
you're flying
21.
this now under Part 107. You built it, you're flying it,
Oh,
you're doing Part 107.
right.
Does it need remote ID? Does it
now it has
not?
to be.
Is it when has it been
Now it has to be.
manufactured?
Now it has to be a standard remote ID, and the data manufacturer is very important. I'm with you.
Yeah, like there's
Yeah.
just
So
so
I
many
would
things
say,
like
unless
that.
you're, I would say, I mean, to me, and this is again best judgment, if you're replacing a majority of the parts or have replaced the majority of the parts, then it probably, I don't know, maybe a thought. But if you're replacing this, I know, right? Who knows?
No, we fought
Or if you're
against that.
replacing the
as
same
you,
motor,
as
let's
you
say you're
remember.
Alex and you hit the same gate on the same motor, and you replace just the one motor 16 times. Have you really replaced a majority of the parts? Nah, not really.
It's his favorite X.
And don't forget that you filled
Yeah, of
out
course.
the NASA form for your drone accident every time you replace the parts, right?
Right,
Oh,
right.
of course. Every time you break
It's
a
like
prop.
a million questions.
Jesus.
I think I'd be dead by the time I finish out filling all those out
So-
for
Right?
how I
So
fly.
we're talking about the UAS, ASRS, Aviation Safety Report System, which is managed by NASA and is used in manned aviation, crewed, and it's been now carried over to UAS. And the recommendations that I ran an ad hoc committee in the drone safety team, presented it to the full plenary on December 8th. So far, so good. We have no dissenting comments, and in fact, the director of NASA, who is responsible for all of ASRS, Becky Hui, was enthusiastic and sent a note of praise on the presentation. So this is the sort of thing. Form is very important. Content is important. Form is very important. So we got positive comments from NASA. So now we can move this forward with the FAA. And of course, the co-chair of the DST is Abby Smith, and present on December 8 was Danielle Corbett, her sit-in for that day, a very capable FAA executive. So that's progressing. So when we did, the FAA recommended that we do incident reporting, and in our safety guidelines, we pointed over to ASRS, and we're hopeful that over time that will mean a very simple and frictionless, appropriate incident report that is aimed at best practices, as opposed to I broke a prop.
So to clarify that last point of Dave's was that in the AC for CBO rules, they wanted the CBOs to basically intake any kind of accident information and keep track of all of that and submit that information to the NTSB or the FAA as needed, all this stuff. And it's just like, you just created a system for this. Like, why are you offloading that to the CBOs? So,
and not only offloading, this is one where my father would use the expression, I'm in here for being crazy, not stupid. And so this would open us up to litigation for insurance information, retaining personal information, accuracy of information, would be getting requests for electronic discovery from litigation. Yeah, and this is exactly what ASRS has done. They create anonymized information so that the aviation community has the benefit of the data. So this is not to hang out a CBO. So we're not going there.
Yeah, and I mean, here's the thing is, in the world today of your data has value to every organization out there, every company out there, we don't want your data because then we have to manage it. In fact, our membership sign up requires the bare minimum information from you, and I think it's like an email address and your name. Like, that's it. And so We don't want your information. We don't want any of that. If you need to submit any kind of accident report, please do so through the um, the
30
NASA
page.
system. And
UAS ASRS.
don't email us about your accident. I don't want that information. Um, go out, have a blast, and don't hurt anybody, and don't hurt yourself. And if you crash, you crash. But I mean, yeah, we don't want your information at all.
Well, if you do get tangled in like a ball of guy wire in a gate, tag us because I want to see that picture.
Yeah, we want to see the photos. Like, I want to see the aftermath, but I
Yeah.
don't want
If
to know
you're
what happened.
exploded into a million pieces over like a concrete pad, I'll want to
Mhm.
see that picture too.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to see that, but yeah, I just don't report it. We're not collecting that data. We're not submitting it anywhere. We're not the drone police. We're not any of that. We're here to help facilitate you guys having fun,
Yeah, I've
and
made many
that's the way we
drone-shaped
want
holes
to
in
be.
the snow.
Yes. I
Since
remember the first accident, or the first drone explosion I saw, was my friend's quad was racing, and they were just lapping, going around trees in a park, and he clipped a tree, and I don't know if it was a branch or the trunk, but everything kept going in a straight line until it just started like fanning out. And I mean, a GoPro went one way, a battery went another way, an arm went, another way. It looked like a rocket explosion. It was pretty crazy.
Kind of flying.
well,
See, another physics lesson that was
yeah,
on trajectory, right? We could have gotten out.
Mhm.
We could have done dynamics and static tutoring right there.
Yeah. So,
well, we're running
but
a bit over time, but I did want
yeah,
to
I
mention one
apologize
other
for.
thing quick, that a common comment I've seen on YouTube videos is like, oh, now FPV pilots have to have a visual observer because all of our CBO regulations say if you're flying FPV, you need a visual observer. That's not us. That's not the CBO saying you have to do this. This is something that's already been a rule that you're already supposed to
24809.
be following, and it's nothing new. But it
No.
seems like it's a surprise to a lot of people. You're already breaking the rules, so that's that.
And this is
Yeah.
something that Kenji and Vic and Alex have all done work on trying to get waivers for these submitted. I think Kenji's had 2 approved for no visual observer. But those are under Part 107, so it's a little bit different. But one of the feedbacks that we got from Mr. Merkel during one of the Droning On After Dark podcasts that the FAA did, was that the more waivers that get submitted for things, and the more incident free operations that happen, the more likely it is that they're going to look at it and say, meh, this isn't a big deal, right? So
Right.
that's something that Kenji and Alex and a few others in the community have done some work on, to try and push forward with visual observerless flights, or spotterless flights. And so hopefully that continues, and we'll see some traction on that down the road. Again, we've got new leadership in the UAS integration office. Hopefully it's somebody who's willing to listen and willing to be friendly to recreational, and allow us some voices. But the nice thing is us and FTCA and AMA, if you want to look at it that way, we're all stakeholders now, and we can be a louder voice in the room and raise our voices a little bit more. So hopefully that makes a difference. Dave, anything else for us, man?
Well said. Nope, we're cranking on the 2 tasking groups out of the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee. That's DG14, DG15. Has to do with beyond visual line of sight, as well as a how to communicate. And the other one has to do with you're a drone operator or a corporation, and you want to start up a program at some different location. Who and how do you communicate to make that frictionless? local municipalities, government, landowners, et cetera, et cetera. And so, good piece of work on both of them gearing up, and that will. We're on a holiday break right now. That'll resume next week.
Alex?
Anyone want to take bets on what the FA is going to drop before the new year?
They told us no
No.
surprises
Have a couple
this year.
days left.
They did tell us no surprises, so.
And we do, and we think that the counter UAS is we're not going to hear anything about that arc until February at best,
Okay.
and that is 2023. We should always specify a year in these discussions.
Yeah. So, for those who don't know, so in the last couple, December 30th, 31st, FAA likes to drop bombs, right before the end of the year. And so the last one was remote ID, I think.
Very important, right? Very important documents that just require all
intense
hands on
scrutiny.
deck.
Yeah. So,
analysis.
Tried to hide them at the end of the year.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
And
Dan,
I did
anything else?
check to see if the FAA dropped the Reauthorization Act into the Ombuds document that was just signed that funds the government through September, and it did not. So we anticipate that I don't think they can either, because it's a single. Because that's a single. What they just signed was authorization through September 2023, and of course, just as you were pointing out, the FAA reauthorization is a 5 year, so that's 23 through 28.
Yeah.
So I
So
just
it's gonna have to be the
just
next
checked
legislative
just to
session.
see if there was any little hints in there. There was not. So
Yeah.
it was
So
4,000 page.
I mean, we don't know what's going to be in that. We have reached out to some select folk to see if we can, make some suggestions on things that need to go in there and things that need to just take a walk off a short bridge. But we don't know anything beyond that. Beyond the little bit of outreach. So. As soon as that comes out, you can bet we'll be all hands on deck, breaking that thing down, figuring it out, and what it means for the recreational community and probably the Part 107 community as well, because it all kind of goes hand in hand. So, but yeah. Dan, anything?
Nope, we covered it all.
All right, guys. So we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. I appreciate all the feedback, all the questions. It's all been amazing. Keep that coming week after week, or every 2 weeks, I should say. And if you have anything in between, obviously we've got this massive Discord channel. You can reach out to us via email. All that's on our webpage, or Facebook, or any of those channels. So really appreciate all the feedback, the questions, and keep that coming, because it lets us know what you guys are thinking, and it lets us kind of plan what our next steps are. So good deal. Have a great night, guys. Have a happy and safe New Year's, and don't get caught missing or getting one of your flights canceled, because that's a bad deal right now too. So talk to you guys later.
Bye.
Here.